and I'll get the date right. Today's Wednesday, April 8th at 5 p.m. This is a meeting of the Capital Subcommittee of the Advisory Committee, here to review warrant Article 9, the Community Preservation Act Committee's recommended appropriations for this year. I will make Laura a co-host.
Okay, thank you. Does that allow me to share my screen?
Yes.
Ah, there we go. Now I see it. All right, great. Okie doke. All right. So thank you. Nice to see you all this evening. So I'm Laura Smead. I've only been with the town a short while. I'm the new community preservation planner for the town. Started in January. Until Nancy is able to come, I'm happy to kind of start the presentation, and David, feel free to chime in anytime you have something to add. But we'll just walk you through the Article 9 recommendations. But before we get into that, I'll just start with the brief overview of some of the CPA funding and trends first, before we get into kind of what the committee's recommending. Okay, so a little bit of history here. So since Brookline adopted CPA in 2021, there's really been a stable, there's a stable funding source through the 1% surcharge and the state match and the interest. Those funds are, as you know, restricted and must be used for community housing, historic preservation, open space, or recreation. And also is designed for capital investments, not ongoing maintenance. And there's a number of eligibility requirements that all the projects have to meet. So here's a little bit of an overview of where the appropriations have gone over time. There's been strong demand across all of 3 categories, and community housing has the largest share of funding so far, about 56%. That reflects both need and alignment with CPA goals, and the fact that housing is really expensive, so they tend to cost a lot of money to do. But open space and recreation and historic preservation also are active and have everything has been well balanced over time in the portfolio. In terms of the last 2 funding cycles, so in 2025, there's a healthy mix of applicants across all of the categories. There were fewer full applications, I would say, in the first funding round. I think it was just a learning year for everyone. So it's not necessarily that the projects were ineligible to get to town meeting. Sometimes it was just the applicants didn't have the capacity to put in the full application. So some of them postponed and applied the next year. The next year was much more successful in terms of applicants who went all the way through from pre-application, full application, and town meeting approval. In terms of just straight looking at town and third party, there's more town projects awarded than third party projects awarded. But when you look at overall funding dollars, more money goes to the third party than the town, 70-30. But I don't think that necessarily tells the whole story, because when you think about private third parties coming in, a lot of those are housing related projects, so they're more expensive, and they're also bringing in a lot of other private dollars into the mix. So for town projects, the CPA tends to fund almost 100% of the overall project cost, so that they always look favorably on projects that bring in money from other sources. For third party projects, it's usually on averaging funding only about 44% of the overall project costs.
Excuse me, Laura, I'm not sure what third party means. Can you tell me?
Okay, so town literally means it's the town of Brookline Department. So it might be the recreation department, for example, or the DPW, or the planning office or something like that. But the third party is usually a nonprofit, or like the Brookline Housing Authority, the Brookline Community Development Corporation, a parish or a synagogue, something like that.
Thank you.
So I think this slide is really the one that tells the most full story of town versus third party, because it's looking at it by category, and you can see like and actually none of this is that surprising to me. When I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense, because the housing, right, the town doesn't, it's not a landlord and it's not a developer. So the housing, even if funds were going to, say, that the town's trust, which is proposed to happen for this next fiscal year, all of that eventually would just get passed through to a third party anyway. So all of that is mostly, again, the Brookline Housing Authority, which is a quasi-governmental organization. The Brookline Community Development Corporation has been another big recipient of funds, and a lot of housing preservation projects. There's some housing support projects in there as well. And then for open space and rec, that is almost the inverse, right? So it's entirely been to town projects, because there's very little third parties who own or have eligible land or a recreation facility that to apply for CPA funding. So all of that's been town-owned land and assets so far. And then historic preservation is a mix. So it's been a mix of town historic assets and third-party historic assets. And even among the third-party historic assets, one of them in particular that I can think of, it's the Brookline Arts Center, is actually a town-owned property, but it's counted as a third party because they're the kind of the caretakers and the ones who applied for the funds. But the town is also benefiting from that. And any third party, especially, historic preservation, where it might be a church or synagogue, all of those organizations have a public purpose. They host community organizations like the Brookline Food Pantry, or they're open to the public, and the CPA is only funding usually like preservation efforts of the exterior and structural issues like roofs and things like that. Anything you'd like to add on that, David?
No, that's fine.
Mhm.
Just continue with the overview.
Okay, so I'll just pause there, because then we're gonna just go into what's being proposed for this coming year. But are there any questions so far on the past funding history of existing projects? I mean, I'll also add that, so far the most projects are progressing as expected. There's some acceptable delays. A lot of them are still in kind of early implementation. They're in procurement. No projects are complete yet, which is typical given kind of the scale and complexity of a lot of things happening. But the two that are most close to completion are the All Saints Parish roof preservation and the golf course clubhouse window preservation. I was just out there this week actually, and took some pictures of the newly restored, windows at the golf course clubhouse. So there's some that are going to be starting to wrap up pretty soon. If you've been near Town Hall recently, you might have seen some of the construction fencing up around the public health building for the pocket park and things that are going to be installed this spring.
So I have a question.
Yes.
The historic preservation, you said the art center was considered third party, even though it's a town-owned property. How much was the art center?
Oh, I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm sorry. It was, I know it was for kind of a rehab restoration where they're
Yeah,
putting in some mini splits and ADA access, if I'm remembering correctly, David.
yeah,
I can look
it's
up the amount.
initially the request, if I remember, is something like 580,000, but there's all kinds of requirements having to do with ADA access. So after some deliberation with the Arts Center board, we broke it into two parts. So the first part, which has to do with more environmental things, the air conditioning, heating, and all of that, that's around 250, and that's going forward. Meanwhile, there's a lot of work going on with the Architectural Barriers Board and how to make the building handicapped accessible while preserving its historic character. So that's still out there. We haven't granted money for that. We're waiting until the Art Center is able to come back with a plan. And the way it works between the town and the Art Center has the custody of this building, but in the lease it says it's responsible for all the maintenance and improvements to the building, and that's in lieu of rent. So it's a kind of partnership between the town, which owns this historic property, which the Art Center is able to use for a community purpose.
Okay, great. So it was 250,000 that of the 1.8 million represents the Arts Center is what it sounds like you're
Yeah,
telling me.
I
For the
looked it up. I
million-
think it's 190,608 is what I
So
have
it's
on my.
200,000.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
so it's like
okay.
1.6 million has been to other third parties, and is that just those two, the synagogue and the church?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's the,
So
Yeah.
we've given 1.6 million divided between Ojai Shalom and All Saints Parish. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
I don't
Also, I just wanted to add, Laura's being modest. She has now 37 projects under management. So, and has to sort of ride circuit on them, find out about their progress, and keep things moving. And well, actually, it's
there's 29 projects from
29 plus another.
plus now the new ones that will
It gets
take
you
on.
up to
Eight.
right. Gets
Yeah,
you up to
yeah,
37.
above 30. Yeah, yep.
Okay, thank you for answering. Why don't you go on? Thank you.
Okay, and I think Nancy may have just joined us as well.
I did. Sorry to be late. I couldn't find the Zoom link. It's a ridiculous thing. But anyway, I'm here.
Okay.
Well, hello, everyone.
Hi, Nancy. So we were just about to go into the recommendations for fiscal year 27.
Okay.
Would you like me to keep carrying on, or would you like to take over?
Why don't you? Because as you can tell, I have
Oh,
a bad voice
hear
today.
that.
Yeah.
I hear that. Okay.
Bad.
Oh, okay. No
Thanks.
problem. Just chime in. Either of you chime in if there's something I'm missing. Okay. So quick overview of the total requests is 6.3 million.
Could you share that slide?
Yes, is everybody seeing the slides? I am sharing the slides.
I'm seeing.
I see it.
I got it now. I see it now.
Okay. So the total requests are were 6.3 million this year, but the available funding that they were working with was about 4.1 million, and that was with funds from fiscal year 25 that were in the bank, so you knew how much we were spending. And so that really required the committee to make some difficult decisions and prioritize, projects that were aligning with CPA goals and addressing urgent needs and were ready to move forward. And we share the rubric with you, so that they work off of the rubric and try to go according to the plan and things like that. So there are a total of 8 projects that they are bringing forward for funding. This is the 2 motions that will be for town meeting. Based on, and one is just the anticipated revenue for fiscal year 27, and all of that's estimates, but I would say that they have a pretty good idea based on there's a number of prior years that working off of, so that's a pretty good working estimate. And then the one motion for the appropriation of the awards. So the projects themselves, this is just a quick snapshot of the community housing projects. The projects are largely focusing heavily on the preservation of existing affordable housing. That's one of Brookline's most urgent needs. The Trustman Apartments is a roof preservation project. It's preserving 86 affordable units. It's addressing roofs that have reached the end of their service life. It's preventing future water damage and costly structural issues. And it's anticipated that that funding is fully leveraged. It's with the state matching funds that they're expecting, and that will be enough to complete the project. The High Streets Veterans Apartment Window Project is also a preservation project. It's addressing some failing windows that are creating some unsafe and unsanitary living conditions. Unlike Trustman, the project still has a funding gap. It's expecting to be phased, but the CPA funding is the critical piece that will move it forward. So they're anticipating having to just kind of that will allow it to replace enough windows in at least one building, if not two buildings, but there's several buildings that they'll have to chip away at over time. But that's a little easier to phase. It's easier to phase windows than roofs. So I think the roofs were definitely their highest priority, and that's what they communicated to the committee. And then there's a recommendation for 400,000 for the Affordable Housing Trust or the Housing Advisory Board, and that's a flexible tool that's going to allow the town to respond quickly to housing opportunities. It can also, support creation or preservation efforts outside of the town meeting cycle, and that flexibility is really important in a high cost, fast moving housing market like Brookline. So that'll be great. We actually ran into an issue with one of the Boylston Street projects earlier this year, and the Housing Advisory Board was able to kind of step in and help them out when they ran into some unexpected termite damage on one of their projects. So historic preservation. These projects are mainly focused on long-term structural preservation, public safety, and in maintaining important community assets. So there's a total of 1.6 million here. The United Parish steeple is restoration is addressing some significant structural deterioration. It's a public safety hazard due to some falling stone from the steeple, and this historic structure dates back to 1873. But importantly, it's strictly for the historic structure. It's not for any religious use or symbology. The building is serving a wide range of community functions, including like the food pantry, for example. And then the old burial ground is a town effort. It's continuing kind of a multi-phase effort. It's helping to preserve Brookline's oldest cemetery, restoring some tombs and walls, and improving safety and long-term stability. And there's also some interesting history there with some, one of the priorities of the CPA is to also try to shed more light on disenfranchised people, and there's documented slaves that are buried in the cemetery as well. So this can help kind of preserve the tombs and educate the community about that as well. Okay, so open space and recreation. These are projects. There's some
Laura?
that are, yes.
If I could interrupt, you've made several references to the purposes of the CPA, like you just said, for unrecognized groups and everything. Is that a select board policy? Is that written into the state legislation? Where do these purposes come from?
So this
it came from both the state legislation. We have a mandate from the Chapter 44B, and it's incorporated into our plan. We have a plan that we developed actually with Laura's participation in health, our first plan out 24 to 29, and that's comes directly from the plan. There were
Yes, yeah, there's some things like climate resiliency and inclusionary for people who are
Marginalized.
marginalized, thank you, that are coming out of overarching goals that are part of that plan. And that plan had a lot of community outreach and incorporated a lot of other existing plans that the town had. So it was really putting, there's things that are in the statute and things that are sort of set a structure for eligibility, but in terms of, there's a lot of just policy and priority that's really up to the community. And so the plan helped bring in the public voices and other departments and try to figure out exactly what the community wanted in terms of priorities and things to kind of emphasize. So that fed into, what they look like for, like, what the rubric looks like and what the community what the committee considers when they're evaluating projects.
So who wrote the plan?
So
the committee wrote the plan with the help of a consultant, Jen Goldson, and actually Laura was on the staff of that committee at the time. It involved focus groups, involved a charrette, involved a community survey, and I urge you to take a look at the plan. All of it, it says in the legislation that the committee shall study the needs of the town and base its plan on the existing plans that exist, open space plans, housing and production plans. All of those plans are incorporated into this plan. So this is taking all of the priorities that the town has expressed through its plans, comprehensive plan too, by the way, and applying it specifically to the mandates and requirements and restrictions of the Community Preservation Act.
I would like to follow on with a question. So it's almost $1 million. And so I would just like to know how much is due to going to be used for restoration. And in other words, how is the money going to be used? I understand the purpose, but I don't understand how the $865,000 is going to be essentially used in this project.
Well, we can look at what was in the full application, but I would probably just refer you to the Millie, the person who put in the grant award for specifics, but they have to give budgets and quotes and things for where they come up with the budget.
Right. This is the second effort. There was a prior effort. The town has already rehabilitated and restored half of the burial ground, and it involved. Actually, this needs to be done. It's quite compelling, simply from the point of view of safety, because there are the crypts where people, if they walk over them, they can collapse. So they need to get get in there with masonry and restoring and rebuilding to make them structurally sound. It's a park. People walk there. It needs to be safe.
Is anyone from DPW here on the meeting?
Yes, I'm here. I can speak to that a little bit more. As part of the overall tomb restoration, this is specifically for the restoration of tombs that you can see a little bit, like just a little bit of that towards the middle left, of this image, and the right of the image, where half of one side of these tombs were restored as part of our effort in 2022. And since then, we have been working with a design consultant to create really detailed construction drawings on, how we're going to restore this these tombs, as Laura mentioned, for stabilization, and also, just like long-term stability and preservation for further decades to come. So we have been working on that, and the documentation is close to being completed right now. And as part of our application, to the question of how are we going to spend this $865,000, we did submit a detailed breakdown of where that is going to go. So again, we're happy to share that detailed budget with you separately if that's something you'd be interested to look at.
That would be very useful. I mean,
Yeah.
we're looking very closely at the amount of money that's been spent, and if it's all documented there, I'd love to see.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And right before we submitted or right after we got the word from the CPA committee about approval of our application, we actually received a more refined version of the cost estimate, and we'll forward that along to you.
Thank you. I have a question before we go back to the presentation. You did share your scoring rubric with us, and it seemed that everything was weighted equally. So though you spoke earlier about you created a plan to respond to town priorities, if two things are created equal, like does a town-owned asset trump a private asset, or does, I'm trying to understand how you winnowed down, I guess is the proper way of saying it, winnowed down the applications to the ones you picked. The rubric that you shared didn't really make it obvious. And nor did you provide us with relative scores. It's like you've,
But the rubric was only one tool that we have to support the decision making, but there are other considerations. Is the project ready, or does it need more work? In Temple Sinai was the project didn't have enough plans regarding matching funds that they would raise from the congregation, and there were still some issues about the architecture and whatever. So we just felt that one should be sent back for more work. We expect that in the future it may come back in a more developed form.
So it'd be useful moving forward, Laura, if there is a score sheet or some final, if you can show us like these were all the applications, this is how we graded them. These were the, I'm assuming that even when there's other things that aren't on your rubric, like David was saying, that they aren't ready or they don't have the matching funds, that's included in your scoring, so we can understand.
It's the rubric. Well, first of all, it's a work in progress. This is like version 2. We're already working on version 3. Have it on our agenda to come up to evaluate it, to see how useful it is, how to make it more useful. It's just one way that we try to be objective in evaluating the applications, but the score is not, score does not translate into a funding decision directly, no.
Okay, I'm just saying that for purposes of getting more transparency as to how you make these funding decisions, we're looking for more transparency as to how you make the funding decisions, not just being presented with this is the way it is. We're reviewing this budget just like we review any other budget, and people justify how they come up with the numbers or the requests for projects. So that would be helpful. I'm gonna call on Alexandra. She's been patiently waiting.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Alexandra Vecchio, Director of Sustainability and Natural Resources. I was going to drop this in the chat, but it says the chat is disabled, but there is a link on Brookline's website. If folks want to look, and they have all of the submitted full CPA applications that were submitted, including the budget sheet for the Old Tomb Restoration Project. So the vast majority of the costs are for construction itself, but you can see the breakdown there. So if you'd like me to send that to you all, we can, or if the chat can turn on, I can do it that way.
I'm looking as to how I turn it on. I have no idea it was off. if you,
Yeah, and I would say that despite the fact that the rubric is part of the conversation, not the end all be all of the decision making, there's public presentations and public hearings of all of the projects, and everything's discussed obviously in open meeting. But the rubric does track kind of, the ones that wound up getting eliminated ultimately and not funded were the ones with the lowest scores. So I think that, does sort of follow. But I think the rubric that I sent was one that was blank, just so you can kind of see the framework. But if you would like to see at least, maybe the end summary of scores or something like that, I can send that your way as well if you're interested in that.
I think, as I said, it wouldn't hurt. It would be helpful for the sake of transparency to understand how you came up with your final list of recommendations. Pam?
That's I think covered in our meeting, in the minutes of the meeting where we did that.
Yeah, but this is you're coming to the capital subcommittee whose responsibility is to vet your recommendations. So I'm suggesting you share that with us, rather than telling us to go back to the meeting minutes.
Well, the minutes, when was it? January 9th, was it? The meeting?
Okay, Pam?
Okay, so my question is, I mean, I don't know how okay, let's say that we rate these projects and they all submit their paperwork and they all are great projects unto themselves, but we have so much, we have a certain over $4 million worth of money. So how we figure that out? How do you choose between a completely town-owned project versus Temple Sinai? And I'm not picking on Temple Sinai, but why would we want to start restoring historic pieces of lovely buildings when their match was to raise it from within their congregation, perhaps? So that's what you mentioned, or the town, which is depending on tax money. So I'm wondering how, if you bring in these projects, how you make that choice. Or are you saying we have to do a certain percentage in each of these categories and that was the only one we had in that category? That's really my concern, even moving forward, or even judging them for right now.
Do you want me to, David, you want to try that, or you want me to?
Well, go ahead, Nancy.
Okay,
We're getting
well,
into
as best I can, and you can hopefully you can hear me, but the funding decisions are not simple, they're complex, but we do divide them into categories. And our goal in the end is to have a relatively even split. Now, to date, we have spent much more money on housing. One thing, it's much more expensive than other things. And we also devoted a very large portion of our resources in the first go-round to the Walnut High redevelopment, 3.75 million, as you may recall. So that skewed the numbers. But we also, have to have projects that meet our criteria in terms of our rubric, in terms of our, not just our scoring evaluation, but also the rubric from CPA, which says, what kinds of categories we can fund. For instance, we can only fund support in the housing category. And we can't create historic preservation projects. Historic preservation are preservation projects that of things that already exist.
Nancy, I wasn't assuming that, though. I wasn't assuming. What I was assuming is, what you have to support, but how do you choose from those that are all meet the criteria? But how do you make your decision based on town versus or that was my question.
Well, the strength of the application is obviously something that we consider. Also, we have to only consider the things that we have before us. So if an organization, in the town wants to have some money from CPA, they have to submit an application. We don't go out and just fund them, or a project in the town. the town needs to submit the application so that we can respond to it. We cannot just pick things in the community and decide to fund them. So luckily, so far, we have been able to fund almost everything, at least to some extent, because even if we had projects that the total of which amounted to more money than we had, those projects had some fatal flaw, like an eligibility issue that could not be overcome. One issue is control of the property, and do we have control of the property? And we've had some applications where the organization or did not have control of the property, and that's a CPA no-no. So we have to say, no, I'm sorry, we can't fund that. That kind of thing. That hasn't happened really since the first year. I think we've done a better job of educating our prospective applicants. For one thing, we've held now mandatory information sessions
Sure.
and for the eligibility part of it. So our eligibility issues have diminished somewhat, but we still have them, and we need to pay attention to that.
Sure.
So
I think I got
yes.
Let me just finish the one thing and
Okay.
then I'll stop. Okay. But what I'm wondering is we're the capital subcommittee and we evaluate all the capital improvement projects for the town. In the capital subcommittee, would it behoove us to become more, to try to reach out to some of the projects that we see coming down the line on and to encourage them to find out if they would qualify and encourage them then to do the application and get all the right information to you? I mean, is that something that we as the capital subcommittee can advocate for the town to sort of take pressure off the town for other things?
So Pam,
That's what I'm really thinking.
So Pam, I was gonna hold this conversation to the end.
Fine.
I have some very strong opinions about this and concerns. So why don't they finish their presentation?
Okay,
And at
okay.
the end, we'll talk about process, priorities, the role of the town, and even, the effectiveness of the CPA. So why don't we go on, if you can remember where you were in the
Yes, I think I was about to kind of cover the recommended open space and recreation projects. So these projects are generally emphasizing climate resilience, ecological health, or kind of long-term planning. There's 3 recommended projects totaling $430,000. 2 of them relate to, well, this first one here is an invasive species management projects, kind of continuing that. They've come before us and been approved before. So it's a targeted phased effort to protect existing wetlands, preserve biodiversity, improve the long-term ecosystem health of this area. Then there's similarly the tree inventory projects is helping to implement the forestry master plan. It's supporting climate resilience, public safety through the removal of hazardous trees, and long-term canopy management. It's providing some critical data also to the town to guide future decisions for the tree maintenance. Although this isn't funding maintenance itself, it's giving them information that is crucial for maintenance in the future. And then the Lars Anderson Park, the Green Infrastructure Study. This is addressing, or will, when it eventually is constructed, will address flooding and stormwater issues through the restoration and expansion of some wet meadows in 2 different locations. It also would enhance passive recreation. And so this is a really in-depth study that will deliver some construction-ready documents at the end of it and position the town for future implementation funding. So that's really it for the presentation. Happy to, answer questions or discuss
So why don't we start
like-
with questions regarding specific projects? And then move on to the broader issues if you folks don't mind. Does anyone have, any of the committee members have, or other members of the public, Carla?
Sorry, this isn't a specific project, but I was interested in the line item for administrative costs, which I think is approaching 200,000, is that right? So what does that cover? I mean, for example, are there signs that are put on the property saying that this preservation project, this open space project is partially funded with CPA funds? What do administrative costs cover besides salary and benefits?
Okay, Laura, you wanna answer that?
I mean, it's mainly salary and benefits.
And
But
dues.
we don't necessarily, use all of it, I would say, in a given year. But there's consultant fees occasionally too, I think, especially if there was any, gap of a staff member that was used for some consultant fees. Originally, I think it was also used to help put together the plan in the first place. But for now, I think it's mostly just funding the staff position.
And also dues for the statewide advocacy
Okay.
organization,
Okay.
which amount to a little less than 10,000.
So it sounds like there's a bit of a cushion in that line
Well,
item.
the statute allows us to schedule a 5% of our budget for administrative costs, and we do that because we're not sure what's going to come up necessarily during the year in terms of needing of consultants or et cetera. And then if we don't spend that money, one thing is the CPA differs from town budgets is that we carry over the money to another year. You end up putting it in free cash, but we don't do that. Our money goes back. So at some point, we'll have some buildup of extra money that we can use for other projects or things that come up, and we like to be able to fund some open space purchases, if possible. That's one thing the committee has wanted us with, and the community has wanted us to do from the beginning. Right now, we haven't had any actual opportunities to do that, but in order to fulfill the opportunities, you have to have the money. So it doesn't hurt to have some money put into the bank for that kind of a thing. But that's the answer, is that, we will have a budget allocation of 5%, and then what we don't use, we get to keep. It's not like we have to turn it back. It
It goes back into the unbudgeted reserve
right.
Right, I understand.
when the books are closed.
Thank you.
Michael?
Oh, that's a good, I'm sorry,
Right.
just to follow up, do you get audited along with other town funds by the town auditor or?
No doubt. I haven't really gotten to that, but yes.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know who raised their hand first, Sean or Michael, so I'll go with Michael since he's a committee member.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Just a couple of questions. In terms of the projects that have been funded, and I know we've only been doing this a few years, what kind of audit is there or on the work that actually has been done to say, this amount of money was allocated for this project and it was done 90% or it was done 100%, or is there any kind of follow-up on the project after it's done?
That's what
So-
Laura does.
That's what
Yeah,
was
so
gonna say.
I would say we haven't actually had any projects done, except for maybe like right this moment. And the requirements after a project is done, there is a clawback amount of years. I would say some projects like the golf course windows are kind of like, once they're done, they're kind of done. They have a sign up that acknowledges CPA temporarily for maybe another 6 months or so after the project's completed to help raise awareness, but otherwise not. Something like All Saints Parish, which is the other example of they're pretty much done. That would be probably an annual site visit just to, make sure they're still sort of having a public purpose. They're still open, to the public or hosting community organizations, something like that. I would say I'm a little less worried about in that case of them not having some sort of historic restriction or something, but it would be more of a low-key annual visit. And I'm forgetting I think it's 7 years in the clawback. I'm trying to remember what it says in the grant agreements, but I want to say it's 7 years. So otherwise the day-to-day monitoring is, a site visit periodically, at least once or twice a year. They give me quarterly reports, any and all invoices for the town I see, I have to make sure it's following the project before it gets paid. If it's a third party, they have to show me the invoices and proof of payment, and it's a reimbursement. So there's a process that goes into it, and making sure that everything is on the up and up and following all the rules, and that things are being, spent accordingly. And then I update the committee every month and kind of the status of the projects and how they're spending or not spending the money, and if they might need a project extension or something like that. We're just approaching the first time, because there's been a couple years now of some of those very first projects might need a little bit of an extension on some of them, with the exception of maybe Walden and High, which we know is going to be, they're still in pre-development, so they'll need a little bit of a longer time. But other than that, mostly projects are really getting going now, I would say.
Great. I think it would be very helpful for the town as a whole, maybe in the annual report, to have a status of CPA projects and what was accomplished, what's still ongoing. And that would be, I think, very important for people to keep. There's another question I had, and that was about Lars Anderson, that particular project. What is the anticipated total requirement? So, as I understand it, as you described it, this was kind of a overview and project feasibility plan and scoping for work at Lars Anderson in terms of drainage and planting of meadows. But what would be the total cost, and how would that be covered?
So I don't know
Maybe
that, the total cost is going to have to probably come out of the study. How it will be covered is, I mean, I do think that it sounds like it would be CPA eligible. I don't know that, all of it would just, that's a judgment call for a future year, but I think it would be CPA eligible.
I think that would be important if
Mhm.
work was done to project a particular project investment, that it be covered by CPA.
Yeah, it is a requirement if the CPA is going to fund a study, it is a requirement that the study that they fund be able to be CPA eligible in the end, as a project. Whether or not ultimately it's funded by CPA, I would imagine that's historically what the committee has done.
These documents and recommendations go back to DPW, then it will be up to the commissioner and the Parks and Recreation to figure out what's the next step. Is it a CIP? Is it CPA? A combination of the two? Right now, we ask those questions to the committee, and they say we need to have these construction documents. We need to know what it is that we're dealing with, that we can get our arms around. So that's sort of the status at the moment with that particular project. Something needs to be done. It has to do with stormwater management. And so you'll be hearing more about it. And there are others like that we have funded, and with some of the larger, more significant ones, like the ice rink, we went to the town administrator, to to make clear that this is something that's beyond the capacity of a CPA. CPA is getting like $4 million a year. That's going to be many millions of dollars to carry out. So it's either going to be an override. I mean, CPA is also can borrow money to pay for projects, but even that may not be enough to cover that project. So this is an important question, and we're very aware of it. And when we're dealing with some of these things, try to make it clear that the CPA can maybe, I mean, one of the roles that CPA sees itself is being like the initiator, the ground floor, the first money or first initiative to get things started, like these improvements to the Lars Anderson Park. But ultimately, it's going to, how it is financed is something that the town, the select board and the advisory committee, CIP, this committee is going to have to deal with, not just the
I'm
CPA.
going to interject here because we brought this up last year, and I'm going to bring it up again. The state told us that the CPA funding should really be integrated into the CIP planning process. And I know Lexington provides a 5-year outlook for the CPA in the same way that we have a 5-year outlook for the CIP. So on the CIP, we have placeholders for things that we don't know the actual dollar amount, but we put in a placeholder that shows the order of magnitude. And I think that that's missing from your submissions to us. We really need to see a 5-year plan to hear about what kinds of things you're planning on funding. Like, can you make a commitment to fund the HAB every year? That would be great. Then we would know that maybe we could make other, arrangements for the town's own contribution to the, not the HAB, the Housing Trust Fund, excuse me. But
Can I say one thing about that? There's a bit of a wrinkle there because the CPA also does not want us to replace or supplant town funding. It wants us to augment it.
so fine, you can both contribute to the fund.
Just so you know.
Okay, I appreciate that. But I think that somehow this needs to get more integrated into the CIP planning process and not stand alone on its own. So
Can I
that
say one other thing about that?
Sure.
Which is that we've looked at the CPA, I mean the CIP, and we've realized that in the last several years, most of the projects on the CIP are DPW related transportation, and we don't fund that. So,
Right.
I think the town has been not putting things on the CIP because it couldn't afford to fund them. So that, and the CPA, too many C's here. The CPA is taking over that role. For instance, the windows at the golf course, they've needed to be done for a while. But the town hasn't had
But you don't stand alone in taking over that process. We need to have an integrated plan so we can see, like in Lexington, they show their capital projects and it says where it's getting funding. If it's, bond funding, their CIP cash, or if it's CPA cash, and it's all on one table. And that's what we need. And some things have money coming from the town general revenue fund and some of it's coming from the CPA. And we can't see that now. You guys are off on your own. So I think there's a lot of benefit to the CPA process if instead of waiting for the town to come to you and say, can you do this? If Laura I know she's busy and has a lot of projects on her plate, but if early in the budgeting process each year, she can be going to DPW or parks or recreation or building and say, what do you have that you'd like to do that might fit into our categories? Instead of waiting for them to submit an application. That would make it more collaborative and less arm's length, I think, and help make more effective use of town funds. So on that, I know Sean's been waiting
Well,
patiently.
I just have one more question.
Okay.
Thank you. This is just kind of a question with an
Oh.
answer. In other words, the Muddy River is an ongoing source of need in the community, but you know, it's shared both by Boston and by Brookline. And I'm just wondering if the CPA is something that can cover the Muddy River. And certainly we have input, not all of it good, into the Muddy River. And I'm just wondering, is that something the CPA can cover or not?
Yes, with limitations. The Muddy River, and by the way, the Muddy River project was looked on very favorably by the CPA committee. The problem is we have not yet secured Boston's agreement to participate. And there's a couple of issues with that. For one, you know, my first issue was, why can't we just fix our half of the bridges? And you know, that just doesn't work. So we had a site visit, and we could see that, you know, that's a foolish idea. But then, you know, how do we get the Boston to contribute to this? We don't own the bridges ourselves. So the site control issue, which is something CPA pays attention to, is problematic here. We have to have both the owners. And not only that, some of the bridges have MBTA involvement and DCR involvement. So it's a complex project, and we've talked about having a town committee with leadership from the town, mainly the town administrator, to shepherd this thing, because I don't think just the CPA alone can do it. So far, Boston has refused. Oh, they're enthusiastic that we should come up with a plan ourselves on their part, but they don't, you know, they're not willing to put money into it, even though they have vast more resources than we do. Of course, they have vast more property and vast more issues too, but still, you know, this has got to be something that's shared. And so we have to work harder on that before we can fund the Muddy River. And I'm distressed about it, frankly. We made a site visit. I saw trees growing out of the parapets, you know, and
But the
so
stones, between the stones.
yeah, between the stones, it's you know, it's not a great situation. So we need to figure out a way to urge them to we maybe need to involve our state reps. It's a big coordination problem that we have to solve first before we can put any money into it. And I'm sure, you know, my belief is that the CPA committee has been very interested in it, but we just couldn't get over the hump in terms of the issues that can't do it alone. And we have to have cooperation and coordination, cooperation, and a willingness to meet us on the funding issues. So that's
Halfway
the
or more, halfway or
Thank you.
more.
Oh, okay, Sean, you've been waiting so patiently.
I am in another meeting now too, but I don't have the audio on there. I have a lot of comments, but I will begin. Oh, I'm Sean Lynn Jones, President, Brookline Green Space Alliance and Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. On this particular question that Michael just raised of the Muddy River Stone bridges, I mean, I think the obvious thing that has to happen, and it's hard, is the town of Brookline has to make contact with its counterparts in the city of Boston. Perhaps at the highest level, town administrator or, you know, Commissioner of Public Works, Parks over there, to try to get this moving forward. And it may not be possible. Boston may not have an interest in doing anything, but unless they are willing to work with us and begin, you know, cooperating to start, there are only about 2 bridges that are entirely within Brookline that are probably among the least deteriorated, as it turns out. And some of the worst are on the Boston side, and some of them are literally right on the line, leaving aside the MBTA and the DCR involvement there. But in any case, generally, I want to say, putting on my Green Space Alliance hat, that we are in support of all of the open space and recreation applications. And there should be letters somewhere in the files online for the CPA committee. There's a lot of stuff there, so it's sometimes hard to navigate, but I think the letters are there. We've submitted for each of those projects, and also for the old burying ground project, which we really regard as a green space. It is administered by the Parks and Open Space Division. And for CPA purposes, as members of the committee can tell you, there's a fine line sometimes between a historic preservation project and an open space project. The Lars Anderson project could have been split between the two categories as well. But the old burying ground is a green space, happens to be a very quiet one, which is actually quite nice for neighbors who are looking for that quiet, the trees, and it's also historic too. So we sort of regard that as a green space project, even if it's not actually in that category. We wish that there were more applications that were put forward and approved to increase the percentage going to open space and recreation. We're the Green Space Alliance. How can we not support that? And I do want to say that going forward, I hope there will be more. And if you remember, I spoke when the Capital Subcommittee looked at the CIP and particularly the tree planting, tree removal item. And basically, to put this in the largest possible terms, if you look at the funds recommended for tree planting, fiscal 26 to fiscal 33 by the Park and Rec Commission, compared to what's in the financial plan, there's a $1.5 million difference over that period. That's a lot of trees that the Park and Rec Commission was hoping to plant that are not funded in the current CIP and in the projected out-year CIP. So this strikes me as a great area for the CPA to step in. There are dozens of other applications approved for other communities listed in the Community Preservation Coalition database. And I think we heard that budgets are tight and this is money that would not be available. So it's a perfect area for the CPA to step in. And I have mentioned this to Millie before. I hope there will be applications to increase the tree planting. I'll talk more about this at town meeting, but when I crunch the numbers, we're going to fall very short of the urban forest climate resiliency master plan goal if we continue at the current pace, looking at the number of trees that are planted. So that's just one example, and I'm sure there are more. One other comment that I will offer is sort of a disappointment, but there's good news as well. When we began the CPA process a few years ago, and in talking with the CPA committee, I'd hoped that grassroots organizations, friends of parks and other open spaces, would be able to submit applications. But on the whole, it's been too hard for small groups. It's been possible for big groups like churches, as we pointed out. And I think town staff have really stepped up to submit that kind of application on behalf of, say, the Friends of Halls Pond for a project at Halls Pond. And I hope that will continue. It makes long-term planning a little bit different because it's driven by applications bubbling up, not by top-down planning. But that was supposed to be part of how the CPA worked. It was supposed to be an opportunity for community groups to come forward. And if you look at the CPA database, Community Preservation Coalition, you'll see quite a few cases in which these projects have been initiated in other communities by community groups, not from the top down. So I'm very glad that town staff has filled that gap, that it's unfortunate that it's really hard for the grassroots organizations to break through. Finally, on this question of open space acquisition, I won't talk about it at great length, but I will say there are discussions, there are ideas, and that's moving forward. And I hope one of these years that there will be a possibility of funding open space acquisition with CPA funds, whether bonded or not. Boston has a program in which its Parks Department gets a large CPA appropriation every year. And it just becomes a program for buying land. And they go ahead and do that. And it's up to the Parks Department to spend those money. There's a memorandum of agreement between Parks and the CPA committee. And in fact, this program was singled out for lavish praise by the Community Preservation Coalition in one of their newsletters when they bought 1.18 acres at Sprague Pond to preserve as open space. But I hope we can eventually do the same. So that's sort of a rambling set of different comments at this point, because I do have to go, and I will be able to watch but not participate. I'll just add one other point, because it really struck me when it was explained to me. Tree inventory, small project, $35,000 or so. And some people said, what is that? And you have this image of someone going with a notepad and saying, it's an oak. It's far more than that. I talked to Jack Schleifer, our new tree warden, about this. And this is essential to get the trees into our database, so we can then track what they are, when they were maintained, and their health. And so unless they're in that GIS database, you don't know. And so it's a great investment of a small amount of money to enhance our tree care capability. Because I was getting skeptical reactions, because, sure, why do you have to, look at all the trees? But this, a lot more to actually making it part of the operation. Thanks for your patience, listening to me on these points. As I said, Green Space Alliance supports the burying ground and the open space recreation applications, and hopes that they're funded. Thanks.
Thank you. Alexandra.
Hi, everyone. I just mostly raised my hand originally to respond to one of the comments that was being made, but now I actually have, I think, a couple pieces of information based off the last few comments that I think are relevant for the committee's understanding. One, for the Boston question regarding the Muddy River bridges. So I don't know if everyone, when we were saying Muddy River, is familiar with what that means, because it wasn't one of the projects presented here, since it wasn't recommended by CPA, but it was essentially doing an evaluation and a report on the historic bridges along the Muddy River that fall within Brookline or partially within Brookline, to understand, do a comprehensive engineering assessment, to develop a scope of work, and develop an associated cost to repair those. So that's an important distinction, because I think it also connects to Michael's question regarding the LARS project. When we make large capital project investments and plan those out, we first have to scope the work and understand how much things are going to cost, and what the prioritization of the work may be. We do this for all of our CIP projects as well. And sometimes you see that in the CIP, you'll see a few $100,000 in one fiscal year, and then the next year you'll see $1 million for the construction. So it's a similar pattern. I bring that up relevant to the Muddy River Bridges project just to say, Boston CPA is different than Brookline CPA. They don't fund studies. They only fund capital construction work. So Boston is supportive of what we're doing, but their CPA does not fund an investigative project like this, a feasibility study, if you will, a scoping project. They won't fund that. So they've offered us a letter of support and said, we're supportive of the project, but we don't commit funding to this type of project. Once you have that report that tells us how many millions of dollars worth of work and how we prioritize it, then we can have a conversation about how that would be funded and from what sources. But Boston wasn't going to commit to that total cost without knowing what it was. And we don't have that until we complete this study. So it's tricky. I just want to kind of help make sure that folks understand that what we're doing here is setting us up for a future application. And at that time, it may be a different conversation, but we can't get there without doing this initial assessment. And that's also applicable for the LARS project. And then I'll also just say that for kind of that strategic big picture CIP, CPA planning purposes, we, the town staff, do look at it that way. So we map out, here are our CIP projects, and then we map out, here are our CPA projects over several years, or what we anticipate. And we then share those actually with Melissa Goff when we make our capital presentations and present them to the relevant boards and commissions that we present to when we make our CIP presentations as well. So I think the timing can be a little tricky of just like how the CPA process and the advisory committee meeting process line up, but we are looking at that big picture. And I think the piece that one of the pieces that we as staff are trying to still work around is that we too only have so much capacity to both draft these applications, work through the process to get them reviewed. It's lengthy, and my hat's off to Laura, who's able to work with all these different projects, and then to actually implement those projects as well. And so in many cases, as noted, some of the CPA projects that we've applied for in DPW for the last several years are projects that we knew we weren't going to get to in the CIP, or didn't quite fit a CIP project priority, but needed to get done. But we have to balance that with we're still managing our CIP project. So it is also, it requires active management for these projects, and it requires staff time. So we're trying to balance that as well when we think about our long-term plan. So hope that helps offer just a little bit of clarity on some of the topics that were brought up.
Thank you. That was very informative, but I just want to make sure I understand correctly. You had submitted a grant proposal to do this planning work for the Muddy River, and the CPA didn't approve it. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, correct. That's the application that I think Michael was referring to. It was not awarded this year in the CPA cycle, but we did complete an application for it, and the CPA reviewed it quite thoroughly, as Nancy mentioned, in terms of the site visit and things like that. But it was not.
Let me just make another comment about that. While we do planning for projects, as David said earlier, we expect that it's going to be funded. Without Boston's buy-in, and if the CPA in Boston won't do it because their policy is not to fund feasibility studies, then the DPW in Boston must do it, because somebody has to do their feasibility studies. I don't imagine they're embarking on these big projects without feasibility studies. That would be, foolish and malpractice probably. But so we didn't get a commitment, as I understood it, from the DPW either. So it was a significant problem, and it's a problem we have to work through. It's fine to send a support letter saying, yeah, thanks, that's a great project, we support you in doing that. Well, that just doesn't really cut it. I mean, in terms of, what we need, which is that, okay, we're gonna be involved in this and buy into the necessity for it. And I think if they went and looked at it, they would. I don't know what they're waiting for. I really don't understand it. But at any rate, I think maybe they were hoping that somehow the money would appear from someplace else, and it's not gonna.
Well, and I think there's also the nuance of CPA comes with a lot of strings and kind of red tape with it. And when you're talking about needing to make sure that a project that gets implemented with the Muddy River bridges is going to be CPA eligible ultimately when it goes to be constructed. There were some questions around that. I think ultimately it probably would be. But I think there was a site control issue that was a big stickler for the committee when this was evaluated.
So we no longer have a quorum, so we can keep on discussing this, but we are not going to vote these things today. We're going to have to come back and have another meeting. Unfortunately, Pam had to leave, and we're missing 2 other members of the subcommittee. So, and I'll have to figure out when we're going to schedule a vote on these things. So I just wanted to be transparent about that to everyone who's here. But my understanding is, unlike last year, we have the ability, we will vote each of these separately, just like all of our other special appropriations. We are not voting these as a package. It says each item to be considered a separate appropriation. Is that correct?
That's your decision. I mean,
okay, but
town meeting has we've presented our projects in the past to town meeting as a whole. That's what the moderator wanted because of the time constraints. And so we did they were voted as a whole, but I think the advisory committee can decide. You can
Okay.
decide.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding. We have the ability to do it however we want.
I believe so.
Right.
I
Okay,
mean, I
that's
could be
great
wrong.
to hear.
David, do you agree with that?
Yeah, the committee voted each project separately, right? But when it comes to the moderator and town meeting and the time of town meeting, that's up to the moderator.
Okay,
So right now, the
I-
warrant article is set up so that it's 2 motions.
That's the key here. It's not up to the moderator. It's the way that the warrant article has been written. And the
Yeah, but-
warrant article is written to do an all or nothing, except there are 2 of them, but
Right, but a motion to divide the question is always in order.
yes, it's always in order, but if you had done your warrant article as separate items to begin with, we wouldn't need to do a motion to
Well,
divide the question.
Well, we had to submit the warrant article to the moderator, and that's the way he wants it done. So that's what we provided.
I'm sorry, David, that's your choice. That's the CPA
Okay.
committee's choice.
Okay, so that's what we did. And, that was what the procedure has been.
because I know the CPA rules say that town meeting can increase funding. It can turn down though,
Right.
things.
Then,
And if we do it as a bulk, it all in one, we don't have that ability.
Right. So
So,
if someone wants to
This-
dive into the warrant article and divide the question, then yes, the town meeting could reduce the funding
okay.
or reject the funding for any particular item.
all right, we'll deal with that when we get ready to do the vote at whatever future date. I'll tell you, my concerns are we're now whatever our 4th year into the CPA, and state funding, which was one of the big enticements to pass the CPA, has dropped and may drop even further. It's about 14% last year. And I know that's what you're expecting, that's what you're projecting going forward. And as you explained, or maybe it was Laura that said, it comes with a lot of strings attached and a lot of hoops. And similar to the discussion that we've had, the town has had in the past regarding MSBA funding, which also comes with a lot of hoops and conditions. I think it would make sense, given how financially constrained the town is and how the ability to get overrides passed remains to be tested, but is getting more and more constrained, that I feel that this committee should be recommending an evaluation of the CPA program to see whether or not the town wants to consider it in the next year. I don't think that's something we can probably do for this town meeting, but I think it's something we should propose for the fall town meeting. Because if it was a choice between having 1% general fund revenues versus having a 1%, and I know they aren't exactly the same, a 1% surcharge on our tax bills, which is limited to these few categories, without a substantial match from the state, I'm not sure it's worth the constraint. And I think that's something that the town needs to read.
that has to be taken to the voters.
Correct, but I think first someone
Okay.
needs to do a study of it. So that's what I'm thinking. And I wish Pam was still here so we could have a fuller conversation about it, but I think whatever day we reschedule the vote to, I'd like to bring that up, or maybe when we go before the full advisory committee.
I'd like to say something. I'd like to thank the committee, the CPA committee, and Laura in particular for informing us of the details that they considered. And there are questions. I'm really just at wit's end about the Muddy River not being able to be done. I'm on a couple of Muddy River committees that involves Boston as well as Brookline folk, and I think that's got to be that nut's got to be cracked. I mean, that's something that has to be done. So again, I'd like to thank the committee. It's a new committee. I voted for the CPA years ago. Years ago. We would have had so many millions of dollars
So many,
more,
much more money.
and unfortunately, the town voted against it. So, as usual, there's always controversy on how the funds in our pockets can be spent. But I think we should continue this conversation later. But thank you for your presentations.
Yes, thank you. I do want to get a sense for, Sean mentioned an MOU with the Parks Department for a open space acquisition fund. And I know, I've heard talk about whether or not there should be an MOU with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And I don't know if it's premature to be asking, Nancy or David or Laura what their thoughts are on that.
Well, we looked into the issue. The affordable housing has a trust, and the only two state-sanctioned trusts for various areas are in affordable housing and in conservation, and we have a conservation trust. The state does not, there's only one community in the state, I think, that before the trust issue became a legislative issue, they established an open space trust, but nobody else has been able to do it in all that time. And you know, I myself think that's a shame. But so the only way we can do it is to, you know, have some money in the bank, kind of, but it's not as good as having an open space trust. But you know, we'll do what we can. And I don't know about this MOU. It may be that Boston was able to get a trust in before the legislature got involved. I don't know. I just don't know about it, but we can find out.
So you're saying a conservation trust cannot do open space?
Right? Well, it can't do anything.
Correct.
It can only do
That's-
conservation land and
Okay,
not all open space land. Some of it's for recreation, some of it's for
got it.
parks.
I see the
They're not
distinction.
they're not conservation land.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the devil's in the details in terms of the relationship between the Boston CPA committee and Department of Public Works in Boston. And
Okay.
I mean, I would be interested to see how that works, but it would definitely be the case that it's not an ongoing commitment every year. It would have to come back to the committee and be voted and recommended. That can't be something that's earmarked into a fund because that fund doesn't exist. And unless the legislature creates the authority for the town to have such a fund, it isn't possible. We have the Housing Trust Fund. That's under Chapter 44, Section 55C. It's CPA on everywhere on all of that. It's very clear for both for the CPA committee and for the Housing Advisory Board how that can be structured.
I'm sorry, you just lost me. It is or is not very clear as to how you could structure an MOU with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
It's very clear. The law sanctions it, and actually we're doing it this year.
We're working on that this year.
You are working on an MOU?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, we're working on a framework for funding of the Affordable Housing Trust, but we're not very far along in the process, but we're working on it. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
but as far as what David's saying is that there is no likewise mechanism for open space. And so
Okay.
in Boston, maybe there is Boston probably has more power in the State House, et cetera. And maybe they were able to get some sort of I don't know, some sort of a trust or a fund
Yeah.
set up. I don't know. I just don't know.
There is one community on the Cape
On
that
the Cape
did a home
Marion, I
rule
think it is.
petition. There is one community on the Cape, I don't remember which one now, that did a
I
home
thought it
rule
was
petition and
Marion.
actually has, pardon?
I thought it was
Yes.
Marion, but I'm maybe
Marion.
wrong.
That got home rule petition and does have such a fund. But as far as I know, that's the only CPA community in the state that actually has a legislatively sanctioned fund for open space.
Okay, and then just one question on the state match. In your table, Laura, you showed 513,000 and change. Is that actually what you're receiving this year, or is that just an
Yes,
estimate?
the Department of Revenue in November issues the allocations. It's based upon the collections on deed filings on the registries of deed throughout the state that goes into a fund. And there's a quite complex formula that the Department of Revenue carries out to determine how much goes to each.
So we don't know
community.
yet. We won't know
Yes.
till November.
Yes, we know for the fiscal 25. We already had that. That came this last November. That's what's.
So I'm asking about fiscal 26, David. You showed 530.
Fiscal 27, whatever. Well, no, we don't know that.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
We had a memo from the coalition that monitors this, saying, "Don't hold your breath." They expect it to go up a little bit. It's sort of bottomed now. Can't really go much lower. It has to do with the number of real estate transactions in the state.
I'll hold it, David. I'm lost. I'm asking a yes/no question, maybe. In the table that Laura put together, the 513,000, is that in hand already? Or
Yes.
is it an
Yes,
estimate?
that's in
Yes.
hand.
Okay.
It's in hand.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all I wanted to know. And I heard also that in November, we'll find out what the fiscal year 27 amount is.
That's
Exactly.
correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, so any further questions or comments from the committee? And I don't know when, I'll have to figure out when we can reschedule our vote on this.
Well, let me just direct you to something that Alexandra put in the chat about the fact that they had put in an application for an open space trust. And, as I said, it was ineligible because of the fact that CPA couldn't establish a trust. They went to the state and dug into it, but the answer became no in the end. So just so you'll know that, we tried.
But I thought I heard that we already have a conservation trust fund.
Conservation, yes.
For
We don't have an
conservation
open
land, not
space.
open space.
Okay,
They're
so
different.
so I see. So she's saying that a request was made by the Conservation Trust Fund for funds and you didn't fund it. You couldn't fund it.
No, I'm sorry.
no.
I shouldn't have used the word conservation. We requested the creation of an open space trust fund, and it was determined to be ineligible. We have a conservation trust with very little money in it, but that already exists and isn't through the CPA.
It isn't through the CPA, but it would qualify for a CPA.
Yes,
Yeah,
it would.
It is a vehicle available to the CPA.
Okay. And I'll ask one last question. You don't have to spend money each year. You could just put it into the various reserves, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Any money that's not, it's either spent or carried over.
Okay. All right. That was my last question. Going once, going twice. No more questions? Why don't we, I think our next scheduled meeting is for the 15th. If I can confirm that Pam will be there, because I think she's the only other person that we'll need her there to vote. If she can be there, we'll vote these on the 15th. If not, I'll see about scheduling an extra meeting on maybe the 8th. So I will let everyone know. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And for your presentation. And Nancy, I feel bad that I made you talk.
Right. I can't resist. Right?
Okay.
So,
All
okay.
right. Take care, everyone. Have a good evening.